So this TikToker, let's call her Spirit. One day, she's in bed and she starts seeing these creatures, and they start talking to her. Now, Spirit is 14 years old, she's a good kid, she goes to private school, she's class president, and she also makes a lot of TikToks. Mostly just dancing and lip-syncing videos. Spirit also has an older sister. Let's just call her Angel. Angel's 19, and she has cerebral palsy, and she uses a wheelchair. And when Spirit and Angel hang out, Spirit sings her songs and reads to her. They seem to be happy. But over time, Spirit's TikToks start to change. They get a little darker, kind of an emo vibe, because she's being bullied at school. She's becoming depressed. She also thinks she might be trans, but it isn't clear. And so Spirit retreats more and more into the horror movies she likes, and she starts to have dark, intrusive thoughts. And one day, Spirit has a normal day. She goes to school, she gets home, she posts a TikTok, and bedtime comes and she goes to bed and everyone in the house is asleep. And that is when she's approached by these creatures. And I don't know what to call them, so we'll just call them demons. And these demons, they start speaking to her. Now, Spirit doesn't like this. It scares her. She doesn't know what to do. Then the demons start bullying her. They're making fun of the way she looks, they're taunting her for maybe being trans, and they allegedly start telling her to hurt herself. So Spirit gets out of bed and she sneaks through the dark and she goes downstairs. She goes to the kitchen and grabs a large kitchen knife, and the demons keep taunting her. So finally, Spirit does the only thing she can think of. She turns the knife on one of the demons and she stabs it, hoping it'll go away. And she does this over and over again. And eventually she stops and she looks down and realizes she wasn't stabbing a demon. She had been stabbing her sister, Angel. So Spirit calls 911. Then she goes out into the front yard and waits for the police. Police get there and she straight up admits it. I unalived my sister. So they arrest her and it's a huge deal, and all her TikTok followers are like, what the f***? And eventually, all of this goes to trial. And at the trial, Spirit's attorney argues a version of the story I just told you. That Spirit killed Angel because Spirit was depressed, experiencing hallucinations, which I represented with pictures of demons, but who knows what the hell she was seeing. Now, the prosecuting attorney, on the other hand, they argue that's bullshit. That this wasn't because of hallucinations, and that Spirit was obsessed with homicide, and that she would often talk to her friends about unaliving people, and that she shows no remorse in killing her sister. And allegedly, when Spirit was in police custody, an officer's phone rings, and his ringtone is the theme to Halloween, and Spirit jokes, I just Michael Myers my sister. And then another time while in police custody, police gave her McDonald's, and she said, I would have killed someone sooner if I knew I was getting McDonald's. And so the prosecuting attorneys use all of these things against Spirit in court. However, both prosecution and defense agree that Spirit is mentally unwell. So Spirit is tried as an adult, and eventually she pleads guilty to third-degree murder, and here's her mugshot, and she's in prison now, serving 12 to 40 years. And to this day, we still don't exactly have a clear understanding of why she did it. So this woman, let's call her Bull. And Bull has a big problem. She's dead. She's in the middle of getting heart surgery and she dies right there on the operating table. So she's lying there, dead, for about 3 minutes. And the doctors, they know what to do, so they electrocute her back to consciousness. And she's alive again. But she's not better, because later doctors diagnose her with a brain tumor, a really bad one. And they only give her 4 months to live. So Bull does chemotherapy, she does radiation, but unfortunately nothing beats this cancer. So she starts to take a different route. Alternative medicines. And she starts getting better and her cancer starts to stabilize. And she ends up living way past the 4-month mark. Yeah! Until Bull decides to share her story on Instagram, and she starts pushing the alternative cures that helped her. And things really take off for her. I mean, people love her. I mean, her Instagram blows up, she gets lots of fans, tons of support, she creates a wellness app, and the app is so popular, Apple wants to partner with her and make it available on the Apple Watch. She creates a cookbook, she raises a bunch of money and donates it to charity. Things are going really well for her. Until Bull gets more cancer. Not only does she have it in her brain, she has it in her blood, her spleen, her liver, all kinds of places. Oh, but it's not over for Bull. During her rise to fame, she's posting more, she's giving more interviews, and she starts to claim that all of her cancer and health issues started back when she got the HPV vaccine. Basically saying a cancer vaccine ended up giving her cancer. Huh? And this immediately makes a lot of people skeptical. And that skepticism grew, and it grew, and it grew, and then journalists started to investigate her. Then, all of a sudden, boom, Bull makes front page news. 5 charities she claimed she had donated to never got the money. 4 of those charities didn't even know she was supposed to be raising money for them. So then where did all that money go? So that news about the charities just opens the floodgates. And suddenly every journalist in Australia is digging into her past, trying to see if she lied about anything else. Like, did she really die for 3 minutes during heart surgery? Did she really have all kinds of cancer in a bunch of places? And did her alternative treatments really help that cancer? And then all of a sudden, her social media, where she was once loved, was now filled with nothing but hate. And poor Bull, she doesn't know what to do. She's removing comments, she's deleting her own posts that reference the cancer. Then it comes out that she spent that missing charity money on herself. Leasing a luxury car, vacations, clothes, new veneers, and people are pissed because they were lied to. Then Apple removes her app from the App Store and the book publisher withdraws her book from sale. And during all this chaos, Bull is like, okay, I can fix this. I just have to do an interview. So she sits down to do an interview with the Australian Women's Weekly. And it goes about as well as you would expect. I mean, pretty quickly, the interviewer asks her if she has or has ever had cancer. And to everyone's surprise, Bull doesn't lie. She actually says, quote, "No, none of it is true." So why did she say she had cancer when she clearly didn't? Well, in a later interview, Bull actually claims that her doctor had tricked her into believing she had cancer. And of course, journalists look into this, and it turns out that doctor doesn't exist. So that was also a lie. Now, eventually, the Australian government, they investigate all this, and they end up fining Bull like $410,000 for making false claims about donations to charity. Then she doesn't show up to any of her court dates, she doesn't pay any of her fines, and eventually police have to come raid her house and seize items to recoup the unpaid fines. A year later, the fines still weren't paid off, and they raided her house again. And all this happened in Melbourne, Australia, so shout out to Australia. So one day, this woman is in the office at work, and she works in one of those tall skyrise buildings at a banking company. And then suddenly, a full-sized commercial airplane flies right into the building. Boom. And it's a horrible scene. People are screaming, things are on fire, there are hurt people everywhere, and this woman needs to get out of the building fast. But she can't, because she's hurt bad, and she's only half conscious. And as she's laying there, the only thing she can think about in this horrible moment is the thought of her fiancé. This guy, Big Dave, and how they're about to be married, and she wants nothing more than to make it through this so that she can walk down the aisle with him. And as she's lying there, fading, she's suddenly approached by a mysterious guy in a red bandana. And he puts out the flames on her clothing, and he pulls her up, and he leads her to the only safe staircase in the building. So there she is. She makes it out alive. And 6 days later, she wakes up in a hospital burn unit. Now, her name's Tanya, and Tanya has somehow survived the September 11th attacks. And if the attacks weren't bad enough, she then gets some terrible news. Her fiancé, Big Dave, who wasn't with her that day because he was working in another building, the North Tower, that tower also got hit by a plane. And Big Dave didn't survive. And Tanya is devastated, and she's crushed, and she goes through long periods of grief and pain, and eventually she ends up connecting with another 9/11 survivor. That survivor introduces her to an online group he founded called the Survivors Network. So Tanya joins the group, and they love her story, and she quickly becomes very active in there. She volunteers as a tour guide at the 9/11 Memorial, where she can share her story with tourists, and soon she's giving tours to the mayor and the governor of New York. And Tanya's smart. She went to Harvard and Stanford. So she uses her big brain and works her way up and eventually becomes president of the Survivors Network. And the group is thriving under her direction. I mean, clearly Tanya has made the best of this tragedy. I mean, at this point, there's no stopping her. Until 6 years go by, and a couple of journalists at the New York Times reach out to Tanya. Now, I don't know what these journalists look like, but we'll just represent them both with this character, NYT. So NYT reaches out to her because he's doing a story on the 5-year anniversary of 9/11, and Tanya agrees. She'll do the interview. But then, strangely, she cancels and reschedules. Then she cancels again and reschedules again. And then again and again and again. Then she starts avoiding NYT and blocking his calls. So NYT gets suspicious, and he starts fact-checking her story. First, he contacts Harvard and Stanford, but they have no record of Tanya ever attending. He contacts the banking company in the building she was working at that day. That company had never heard of Tanya. So NYT keeps digging, and he finds that not only was Tanya not in the building that day on 9/11, she wasn't even in the country. She was in Barcelona, Spain, where she's from. And her fiancé, this guy Big Dave? Big Dave is actually a real guy. This is his photo. And he unfortunately really did pass away on 9/11. But according to his family, he didn't have a fiancé, and he never knew Tanya. And the mysterious guy in the red bandana who rescued her? also a real person. And he really did quite famously rescue a lot of people that day. But he didn't rescue Tanya, because Tanya wasn't there. She made it all up. She found stories about people who really did die in 9/11, and she worked herself into those stories. So NYT's piece on the 5th anniversary of 9/11 suddenly becomes a story all about Tanya. And he writes the story, and about a week later, he publishes it. And the story blows up. Like, other news outlets are picking it up, and people see it, and they're shocked, and they're like, damn, she lied about everything. Is her name really even Tanya? Apparently. No, her name's actually Alicia. Now, to be clear, they can't really arrest Tanya for lying about being in 9/11. She didn't technically break any laws, there's no record of her stealing any money, but unfortunately for her, the Survivors Network didn't like her lying to everyone, and they got pissed off and they kicked her out of the group and removed her as president. And I guess after that, she was humiliated because she suddenly disappeared and went back to live in Spain. But then, 2 years later, the Survivors Network gets an email. That email was informing them that Tanya was so impacted by the backlash from all this that she had recently, sadly, unalived herself. And that turned out to be a lie too. She didn't unalive herself. She's still very much alive to this day, living in Barcelona. Shout out to New York and Spain. So one day, this woman, Karen, she's at the gym and she meets this other woman. And Karen thinks this other woman is fine and she immediately falls in love with her. Here's the problem. Karen is already married to this guy, James Craig. Not only that, they have like 3 kids together, so it would be really hard for her to just leave. So instead of leaving James Craig, Karen just starts going to the gym a lot more, where she regularly sees this other woman. Now the other woman, her name's Sunny, and Sunny's a personal trainer at that gym. So then Karen becomes a personal trainer as well. And now Karen and Sunny are together all the time. And eventually, they hit it off romantically. Here's the thing about Karen, though. She's an honest person. I mean, she can't keep secrets from her husband, so she goes to him and she tells him the truth, that she's having a romantic fling with this woman at the gym. Now, here's the thing about James Craig. He's a very controlling person. He has tons of rules. He gives Karen a curfew. He limits the amount of money she can spend. He insists that she smash with him every night at 8 o'clock sharp, and then he makes her go to bed by 9. It's weird. Regardless, Karen tells James Craig about her affair with Sunny. And surprisingly, James Craig is all for it. He's like, go ahead. It's not going to affect our marriage. In fact, he's so for it, he keeps trying to get himself involved. He starts sending Sunny flowers and nice texts. He keeps trying to talk them into a threesome. But unfortunately for James Craig, the 2 women don't want him involved. And then they say no. And during all this, Karen and Sunny's relationship and their feelings for one another keep getting more and more serious. And James Craig, he sees that they're falling in love. And he realizes he's losing control of his wife. And he's like, I cannot let this happen. So he goes and he accepts a new job out of state, and he moves Karen and his family far away from Sunny, from Texas to Missouri. Now, Karen moves with her family, but she refuses to let her relationship with Sunny go. So she and Sunny continue their fling long distance, through emails, through phone calls, sometimes they visit each other. But then, one night, Karen and James Craig go back to Texas to attend their friend's New Year's Eve party. So they're at this party with all their friends, and Sunny shows up, and things are about to get crazy. Now, I imagine at this point, everyone's a little drunk, and Karen and Sunny, they start openly flirting and making physical contact in front of everyone. And eventually they wander off and some people at the party catch them kissing. And James Craig finds out about this and he is pissed and he's embarrassed and he's humiliated, and they get into a huge fight, which I guess sort of devolves into a shoving match, and all their friends are standing around like, awkward. So then James Craig feels like he has no other choice. He gives Karen an ultimatum. It's either Sunny or me. So then a few weeks later, Karen files for divorce. And this is where James Craig starts losing his mind. His behavior gets all erratic. At one point, he commits battery on Karen and gets arrested. So Karen's like, F this, and she takes the kids and she moves out. And then James Craig becomes obsessed with her. He starts stalking her a little bit and spying on her. At one point, he takes the air out of her tires and installs spyware on her home computer. In fact, he becomes so obsessed with Karen, he starts looking at old family photo albums during work. And he eventually gets fired. And with no job and no family, at 46 years old, he embarrassingly has to move back to Kansas and live with his parents. Then, sometime later, Thanksgiving rolls around. And that evening, Karen and the kids are at their grandmother's house, which is also in Kansas, about an hour away from where Craig and his parents live. So Karen, the 3 kids, and the grandmother are in the house. And then suddenly, boom, Craig busts in through the back door, and he's carrying a rifle. And Karen is there in the kitchen with their 10-year-old son, Sean, and they are scared out of their minds. So then James Craig, he picks up the rifle, and he aims it at Karen, and he shoots her. Twice. and she falls to the floor, while Sean, he's able to duck down and he runs out the back door. But James Craig, he just keeps going through the house. He goes to the living room and he shoots Karen's 89-year-old mother, and then he shoots his own 18-year-old daughter. And then finally, he goes upstairs and he shoots his other daughter. She's 16. Meanwhile, 10-year-old Sean, he runs to a neighbor's house and he has them call police. The next morning, police find James Craig and they arrest him. Here's his mugshot. So he goes to trial and he's found guilty of capital murder and he's sentenced not to life, but to death. And to this day, he's still alive, but he's on death row. And this all happened in Missouri, so shout out to Missouri. One day, this guy goes out to the curb to collect his empty trash bins. And as he's wheeling his bins back, he notices the recycling bin is heavier than normal. So he turns it over and he dumps it out. And he finds a human foot. Now, the foot, unfortunately, belongs to this woman. Her name's Ingrid. And Ingrid is very nice. She's a single mom, 3 kids. And one day, she meets someone on a dating app. This guy, John. And they talk for about a month, and then they go on a date. That date goes smoothly, and soon enough, they're going on 3-4 dates a week. And it seems like things are going pretty well. But John is always staying over at Ingrid's place. And after dating for about a month or so, Ingrid comes to the realization that John is always staying at her place because he doesn't have a place of his own. He's allegedly homeless. He also doesn't have a steady job either. But Ingrid doesn't seem to mind. I don't know, maybe this is just a casual fling for her. But one night, she sends her kids with her ex-husband so that she can go out on a date with John. And she drives and she picks him up and they go see a baseball game. And they have a good time and they're drinking a lot and they make it back to Ingrid's house. And that is where things go horribly wrong. Because fast forward to the next morning and Ingrid's ex-husband comes over to her house because he's gonna drop the kids back off. And he knocks on her door, but no one answers. He calls, he texts, still no answer. Then he notices her car's not even there. So ex-husband starts to worry. So he calls Ingrid's mom. And Ingrid's mom rushes over, she has a spare key. So they go inside and Ingrid's not there, but her phone and her wallet are. And weirdly, the place smells like bleach. Not to mention, there's a pruning saw in the bathroom for some reason. So Ingrid's mom is now worried. She calls the police and the police start looking into it. Now, Ingrid and her mom actually share a Verizon account. So mom checks Ingrid's phone records and she sees a phone number coming up a lot. And she looks the number up and that number is connected to a Facebook account. John's Facebook account. So mom starts texting this number. Hey, Ingrid's missing. Have you seen her? And John replies like, we went to a baseball game and after that I left. I didn't stay the night. And then mom is texting him like 1,000 more follow-up questions, but John stops replying. He just completely ghosts her. So no one knows what happened to Ingrid, there's no trace of her, and John isn't being very helpful. Until around the time mom is texting John, this poor guy is at home. We'll just call him Guy. And Guy is at home and he walks out to the curb to collect his empty trash bins, and as he's wheeling them back, he notices his recycling bin is heavier than normal. So he turns it over and he dumps it out and he finds 3 plastic bags. In those plastic bags are human parts. A head, a foot, an arm. So he's weirded out and he reports it to police. And the police show up and they identify the body, of course, as Ingrid. Then they also find other parts of her in other locations around the city. And they also find Ingrid's car downtown, abandoned. Now John, he was the last one seen with Ingrid, so police bring him in and they question him. And of course he says, I have no idea what happened to Ingrid. Now this is one of those stories where we actually know what really happened to Ingrid, but we don't know why it happened and we don't know the details. So, here's what we know. John and Ingrid go on a date to go see a baseball game. They have a good time, they're drinking a lot, and they make it back to Ingrid's house. Now, the two are at Ingrid's house, alone, and for some reason, John suddenly snaps. And he gets violent, like really violent. And he attacks Ingrid, and he strangles her to death. And then he drags her over, and he puts her in the bathtub. Then he uses a pruning saw to dice her into smaller parts. Then he steals her car and he drives around and he dumps all the parts of her in various places around the city, including Guy's recycling bin. So eventually, luckily, police arrest John, here's his mugshot, and he ultimately pleads guilty and he admits that it was him who unalived her. And he's sentenced to a little under 28 years in prison, and to this day, we still have no idea why John just suddenly decided to do this. Shout out to Washington. So this TikToker, her name's Ava, and Ava has a problem. This guy is after her with a pew-pew. Okay, so Ava is 13. She makes typical lip syncing videos on TikTok, and people love her. She's got over 1 million followers. And one day, her videos catch the attention of this guy, who we'll call Goldberg. And Goldberg really digs Ava. Now, he's older, he's 18, but that doesn't stop him. He starts trying to get her attention in the comments. It's not really working. So then he tries to get her attention by sending her a DM. Now, Ava actually checks her DMs because she often interacts with her fans. So she sees his message and she replies. And they go back and forth a little, nothing inappropriate. But then he asks if he can buy a few selfies from her. And she thinks about it and she talks it over with her parents and she finally says, sure. And she sells him a few pictures that had already been posted on Snapchat. Now Goldberg is super happy about this. And that is when things start getting weird. He has her Venmo now, so he starts messaging through her Venmo account and he starts asking her for a different type of photo. And she's like, ew, no. And she blocks him on all platforms. Oh, but that doesn't stop Goldberg. He searches around and he finds Ava's classmates from school and he reaches out to them. And they agree to sell photos of Ava to him. Photos that I assume were already public. But they also allegedly sell him Ava's phone number. So now Goldberg has her number and he starts texting her and he begs her to unblock him. But she won't do it. So he sends her $600 through Venmo and he tells her it's all the money he has. But Ava is not giving in. Now at this point, things are getting a little out of hand, and she's getting scared. So she tells her dad, this guy, who we'll just call Dad. Now, Dad is a retired police lieutenant, and he is not gonna put up with this nonsense. So Dad sends a strongly worded text message to Goldberg, basically telling him, don't contact my daughter again. And Goldberg gets that text, and he's heartbroken, and he's pissed off, but Dad isn't too worried about Goldberg. They live in Florida, Goldberg lives in Maryland, so they're not even remotely close. Everything's gonna be fine. Until one night, Dad, Ava, and the family are asleep. And suddenly, boom, a loud bang wakes them all up. And Dad, he jumps out of bed and he runs to the front door. And there's a huge hole in it. And standing in the house is a man with a shotgun. That man? It's Goldberg. Then Goldberg points his pew-pew at Dad and he fires again, but the gun jams. So Dad runs out of the house and after him, but he slams his knee on something, allowing Goldberg to get away. So Dad goes back inside the house and he gets his pew-pew just in case. And he waits on the front porch for police to get there. Before police can get there, Goldberg comes back, but this time, Dad is ready, and he points his pew-pew at him, and he orders him to put down his weapon. Goldberg doesn't back down, and points his right back at him. So then Dad shoots, and he doesn't miss. And he ultimately unalives Goldberg. So police show up, they find 2 phones on Goldberg's body with literally thousands of photos of Ava on them. Now, because of the circumstances, Dad doesn't get into any legal trouble over any of this. And despite everything that happened, Ava's family decided to allow her to continue posting TikToks, which she still does to this day. But then later, the family had to pull her out of school and start homeschooling her after they had an incident with a second stalker. Yikes. And all this happened in Naples, Florida, so shout out to Florida.